States. Now we start with this hour's tariff updates, where European stocks tumbled to a 4-week low, ending a turbulent week dominated by US tariffs and mounting pressure on the healthcare sector. The pan-European stock 600 fell 1.3%, dragged down by a record plunge in Novo Nordisk, which dropped nearly 5% after US President Donald Trump demanded drug makers slash prescription prices. The company is on track for its steepest ever weekly fall. Sanofi also declined, with healthcare shares down 1.6% overall. Markets were unsettled further by Trump's tariff blitz, which included a 39% levy on Switzerland and steep duties on Canada, Brazil, India and Taiwan. Germany's DAX lost 1.7%, while Denmark's OMXC dropped 3% to a 2-year low. Stock markets in Switzerland were closed for a holiday, however. On the upside, Campari shares surged nearly 7% on stronger profits, while Melrose Industries gained over 6%. British Airways owner IAG slipped after warning of higher costs. Investors are also watching US payrolls data due later, after Eurozone inflation held steady at the ECB's 2% target. Rate cut bets for December have now fallen to just 44%. We're now joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political analyst. He's joining us live from Taipei, Taiwan, to discuss this in further detail. Ross, thank you very much, as always, for joining us on the programme. Ross, the deadline for negotiations is over. Some of these deals, of these tariffs, have been implemented today. That includes Brazil, that includes India, among some other nations. How do you analyse the situation and some of the numbers that have come out today?
It's going to be a huge shock for exporters to the United States, regardless of the tariff level that's applicable. Even for the lowest tariffs of, say, 10 or 15%, and in the European Union, it's 15% across the board. You know, these are tariffs that are going up from, in what many cases were around 3 to 5%. So regardless of the industry, regardless of the exporting destination, they're going to have to really figure out how to exist in a very new world. And most importantly, in the short term, they're going to have to figure out who's really going to pay this. Are exporters going to lower their prices? Are importers going to eat the cost? Or are the importers going to pass that along to end users and consumers? So that's really unknown, and it's probably going to vary from industry to industry.
Yes, Ross, do stay with us. We're just going to have a quick look at the live European stock markets, which have opened in the past few hours. We're going to turn to DAX 40 Germany to start with. Let's have a look at Frankfurt, of course, who are in the European Union. Today, they have lost 1.32 points in today's session. That's down 1.3% today. As we can see, lots of instability there since this 15% tariff has been announced. Let's move on over to the United Kingdom. Some say that London has acquired the best trade deal in regards to Donald Trump's negotiations. However, the stock market still has lost 0.51% in this session. That's a minus, you can see it fluctuating there, of around 46 to 47 points. We'll bring you updates on that. Let's move once again and move over to Paris now, where obviously Paris, a key member of the European Union, where they have lost today in this session as the CAC 40 has opened, minus 1.89%. That's a minus of 146.70 points. A loss of confidence there in the French stock exchange. Let's move on once again and move over to Italy. Now, the CBOE Italy 40 has lost a 1.63% today. That's about around minus 124 points. So as we can see there, an ongoing pattern. Ross, I wanted to come back to you after looking at them. We see a loss of confidence on the European stock indices. What do you think this is going to do to the global trade system? Europe, the United Kingdom, has been put forward with some of the best trade deals. You have a look at Brazil, people like Brazil, people like India, they seem to have got some of the worst end of these trade deals. Long-term and short-term implications of this tariff, the implementation of these tariffs. Ross, what's your analysis?
Well, in the short term, again, companies or the manufacturer and the exporter, they're going to have to figure out who ultimately is going to pay their cost. So is that going to be the manufacturer exporter? Is it going to be the importer? Or is it going to be the end user consumer? That's very in flux. We really don't know the answer to that. But it's certainly going to be a short-term question mark or concern over company earnings until we really figure that out. And then in the long term, the thing to watch is how attractive will the United States market remain for companies that previously exported to the U.S. If they can't compete in this new environment of higher tariffs, doesn't matter if they're paying the EU 15% or the UK 10%, they're going to look for other markets. One of the interesting things there is that's why China is still so important to the EU. EU companies want to be doing business in China. They're worried about losing business or less business in the United States, and they're looking for other large markets. And certainly, China is one that comes to mind for European companies, as does other parts of the world like the Middle East as well. But long term, there'll definitely be some changes to how companies plan which markets around the world are attractive to them, and most notably the United States. Some companies might just put less reliance on the United States market as an export destination.
Yes, Ross, and finally I want to look at those outliers, those being Canada and Brazil, those who have had their tariffs seemingly raised for political reasons. Brazil even has a trade surplus with the United States, and yet is still facing a 50% tariff on imports, with the US citing political instability on the ongoing trial of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Canada, of course, just recognizing a Palestinian state, possibly at the UN in September, which Donald Trump has, of course, voiced his concern about. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump using trade as leverage in the political sphere?
He certainly might get away with it with regard to certain countries. With regard to Canada, it might be a little bit more difficult because he's going to get a lot of phone calls from governors and CEOs whose companies are very highly integrated with supply chains that move back and forth between Canada and the United States. And that's been discussed a lot throughout this process. And maybe it's something that President Trump didn't think about before he started to impose higher tariffs on Canada. And also, when Trump met with Prime Minister Carney, they seemed to have a good conversation. It seemed to be a positive meeting. And certainly the Canadians left that thinking that there was hope for better outcomes. So I think Canada probably has reason to be optimistic that they could still negotiate a better deal with the United States, regardless of the Trump administration position or view on Canada's decision with regard to Palestine. Brazil's in a much tougher position. There's clearly a very large amount of dislike between President Trump and President Lula. President Trump, of course, being a supporter of former President Bolsonaro. He views this as a political persecution. I frankly just don't know what Brazil's current leadership could do to address the concerns of President Trump, other than dropping the charges against former President Bolsonaro. But as of now, that doesn't seem likely either.
Ross, you join us from Taipei in Taiwan. Taiwan now faces a 20% tariff effective from August the 7th. How would you rank Taiwan's deal here? How is it going to affect industry in Taiwan? Obviously, the semiconductor industry is a huge exporter in Taiwan. What are your thoughts on that 20% number to Taipei?
there's a few issues there. First, there's no agreement announced yet between Taiwan and the United States. So the U.S. has unilaterally imposed a 20% tariff. There's still a lot of hope that a lot of hope here in Taiwan that ongoing negotiations between U.S. and Taiwan negotiators are going to result in a deal that would be probably similar to the deals that Japan and Korea negotiated, which was a 15% tariff, but with commitments to very large investments in the United States, as well as commitments to buy things like U.S. agriculture products and U.S. energy. But if Taiwan's tariff remains at 20%, then it's certainly going to put a lot of Taiwan businesses at a competitive disadvantage because South Korea and Japan are at 15%. And especially in traditional industries, they are competing against each other, things like machinery and auto parts. When it comes to semiconductors, that's actually separate from these agreements because the Trump administration is still conducting what's basically called like a national security investigation into the semiconductor trade. And the Trump administration still might impose higher tariffs on semiconductors, regardless of the deals with Japan and South Korea and a potential deal with Taiwan. So we simply don't know yet whether or not semiconductors will be included in the existing deals or they're going to be separately imposed higher tariffs.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much. As always, pleasure to have you.